All right, go ahead. Okay, Hannah, you can go ahead.
Okay, so we did ours on EMTALA, and what is it? It stands for Emergency Medical Treatment in Labor Act, which it's a federal law that requires anyone coming to an emergency to be stabilized and treated, regardless of their insurance status or ability to pay. They enacted it in 1986, and it's remained an unfunded mandate. It's also known as the Patient Anti-Dumping Statute, or COBRA, which stands for Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act.
And then next slide, Casey.
Yeah, it's on the next one. Can you see it?
Oh, now I can.
Okay.
So the history on this is there were several cases in the early 1980s where patients were being denied treatment or being passed off to other hospitals because they were not able to pay or were underinsured. It was also called a wallet biopsy or dumping, very simply prior to the implementation of the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act of 1986. A patient coming into a hospital emergency department often had no right to treatment or even evaluation. No matter how dire his or her condition, if patients could not prove that they had the resources to pay for care, they could be turned away or sent elsewhere, sometimes in a taxi, sometimes on foot. They often suffered adverse health consequences as a result of delayed care, and sometimes they died. And so in 1985, a 4-page provision called the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act was inserted into the Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, which was duly passed and eventually signed by President Ronald Reagan on April 7th of 1986. And then in 1986, Congress enacted the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act, also known as the Patient Anti-Dumping Act. And the purpose of EMTALA is to prevent patient dumping, the practice of refusing to provide emergency medical treatment to patients unable to pay, or transferring them before emergency conditions are stabilized. And the focuses on EMTALA is that all patients seeking care in an emergency department be evaluated by a competent clinical professional, and if found having a condition requiring emergency care, must be treated until stabilized before any transfer. And for women in active labor, the hospital must deliver the baby unless the institution is not equipped to do so, as in the case of high-risk pregnancy and the lack of neonatal ICU. The hospital to which a stabilized patient or one who must be transferred because the originating hospital does not have the necessary services or personnel is to be sent must agree to accept the patient, and the patient must consent to the transfer if possible. And then, oh, did we lose Casey?
We. Oh. So yeah, we'll kind of take a break here for a second.
If you, I can pull it up too. I can find it. And let me.
Not a problem.
I have it. Do you want me to present?
Sure. Go ahead, and I don't know how long it will take for her to get back on. So yeah, go ahead and present your screen.
Okay, it's in my screen.
Okay, so do you know how? So to share, go over to the left-hand side. There's a.
Oh shoot!
No,
I.
Also, sorry, go back to the Hangout. Yeah, go back to the Hangout, and then go over to the left-hand side and click on the. There's like a menu that pops out. There's a green screen with a white arrow in it.
A green screen. Let's see.
Go to the left-hand. So are you in the Hangout right now?
Oh, Hangout. Okay, now I am.
Okay. Go over to the left-hand side.
Okay.
And, there should be a menu that pops out, and there's a green screen with a white arrow in it.
Uh-huh.
Click on that,
okay.
And then click on the entire screen, and then just select the one. Yeah, there you go.
And now.
Then just go back up to where you were.
And then present. Okay. Now can you see it?
Yep, just go ahead and go to the slide you were on, and yeah.
Okay, so then the final one is the adequate medical records must accompany the transferring patient. And then, was this one Casey, Hannah?
No, this one is mine, so I'll go ahead and do it real quick.
Okay.
So the reasons why it was necessary to promulgate, which means to promote or make widely known, was to combat the discriminatory practice of some hospitals transferring, discharging, or refusing to treat indigent patients coming to the emergency department because of the high cost associated with diagnosing and with emergency medical conditions. Congress enacted these anti-dumping provisions in the Social Security Act because of its concern with an increasing number of reports that hospital emergency rooms were refusing to accept or treat individuals with emergency conditions if the individuals did not have insurance. It was passed in response to a crisis, emergency rooms denying care, just like was said before. And one of the stories that persuaded Congress to act was a nationally publicized effort to find care for a premature infant, including flying the infant around in an air ambulance with nowhere to land.
And so I think Casey was going to read this. So I know she's trying to connect again.
Yeah, Casey, it looks like you are muted. If you want to just go hover towards the top, if you can hear us, there's a microphone. If you click on that at the top, there you go.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay.
Yep, there we go.
Okay, sorry about that.
Not a problem.
Okay. So, let's see here. Okay, so for the entity policies, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, known as the CMS, who were formerly known as the HCFA, and the Office of the Inspector General, who's under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, are the ones that investigate the different EMTALA claims that come up. And the hospitals are required to comply with the EMTALA policies. And then the state survey agency directors will go around and inspect the individual hospitals that have a complaint filed against them to make sure that the compliance is being met. And then they report back to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services of their findings. And recommendations or suggestions were made to the Department of Health and Human Services, or the Office of Inspector General, and to HIPAA to identify and adopt the changes of EMTALA. And then there's three main obligations that hospitals are required to identify and practice in compliance with EMTALA, and those were touched on a little bit before. But those include providing a medical screening examination to all the patients that enter the doors of the emergency room, no matter their insurance type or payment of choice. And if there is an emergency, then, or a serious impairment to bodily functions, or something that could cause dysfunction of the bodily organs, or impact the health of an individual who's pregnant or the unborn child, then they are required to take care of that patient. And then if there's an emergency that the patient is actually experiencing, proper treatment or transfer must be administered at the time of the recognition or diagnosis. And hospitals that do have the necessary tools and qualifications are required to accept patients from other hospitals who do not have the means to care for the patients. And sometimes violations occur, and so the hospital's Medicare agreement can be terminated if that's the case, and then the hospital can be fined up to $50,000 per patient, and physicians may also be fined up to $50,000 per patient. The hospital may be sued, and the receiving hospital or facility can sue the transferring hospital if there's damages caused to them because of improper transfer or negligence in that way. And then the role of EMTALA in Idaho health and welfare. EMTALA investigations are completed only when the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services or the state survey agency receive a complaint alleging violations of the EMTALA regulations. And when the complete investigation is authorized by the CMS, the region or the office in Seattle, the Bureau is required to start the investigation within 5 working days. The Bureau of Health Facility Surveyors complete an unannounced visit to the applicable hospital and complete the investigation. And then the role of the Bureau surveyors is to gather information pertinent to the complaint, and the investigation includes such things as completing interviews, getting copies of applicable facility policies, completing observations if applicable, reviewing the records of individuals who present to the emergency department for treatment, and so on and so forth. The Bureau does not determine if EMTALA complaint is substantiated. Instead, all of the information gathered by the Bureau is documented, copied, and sent to the CMS region's office for review and final decision making. And just as like an example, I was thinking about, like, hypothetically speaking, because a lot of times doctors' offices will see patients, and sometimes for whatever reason, like if they're not paying their bills or whatever, they can deny care to them. But if a doctor's on call and the patient goes through the emergency room to see that doctor, they can't deny the care of that patient, or else it is violating EMTALA. And then it's kind of violating the Hippocratic oath that a doctor takes as well if they decide not to care for them in their own facilities after they've seen them in the emergency room as well. And that is it.
Awesome. Great work. EMTALA is a really interesting topic. In my opinion, it's a really good thing. We don't want people to be turned away from life-saving treatment just because they can't pay. They don't need to, they need to get that help to get stabilized and do all that. So I think that was a good thing to help our patients out. There's some interesting things about EMTALA, like where, if it's on your facility, if things happen to the patient, like there's a lot of interesting things if you look into it a little bit more. But again, great job. Typically, I'd ask, I said this probably the last 3 times, but typically I'd ask you guys another question. Basically, it's just, what's the most interesting thing that you learned as you were studying the topic? But I know Casey has to run to another group thing, and where it was my bad for missing last night, I'll let you guys out of it. So
Okay.
but for just a sec, I'll stop recording, but just hang on for just a